Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Come on in. Welcome to our Industry Partnerships Monthly webinar. We'll give everyone a second to kind of join. But welcome, of course. I'm Cherie Blight. I'm the interim director for our industry partnership team. And we have a great presenter today about the gender wage gap, right? Surprise, there's a gender wage gap. But to really kind of dive in and learn more about like what the causes are and how we might address it as a cooperative Atlanta area. So I'm excited to have a great presenter, Jasmine Payne, here to talk through that. But as we go through, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we're excited to dive in. Today is Thursday, March 19th. So as we go through, we love to use the chat. We love to use the reactions. So again, please put it in the chat. We'd love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us, is this your first time in one of our webinars? Or maybe you're come back every month. And of course, we love to have y'all come back every month with our new topics. So we'd love to have you introduce yourself in the chat and let us know maybe who you're with or what part of the state you're from. Where you're calling from or joining us from. But as we go through, definitely use the chat, use the reactions. The reactions are really great because that our presenters can see those easily. They pop up on the screen. So make sure and show them, your love and your applause as you go through. If you're not familiar with how to use those, it's probably at the bottom of your screen and it looks like a little heart that says react. And you can click that and it gives you some fun options. So encourage y'all to use that to engage today, as well as the chat. Of course, we do want to celebrate Women's History Month. Our year, as many of you know, if you've joined us many times, our year is very focused on women because of our WANTO grant, because of our Women in Apprenticeship and Non-Traditional Occupations grant. But obviously, March in particular, Women's History Month, we love to celebrate all of the women that have impacted our world and our lives. I am a big history nerd. So between last month, Black History Month, and this month, Women's History Month, I'm always learning new things from our ecosystem, from our partners, from Instagram. So love to celebrate the variety of women that have impacted our world. So happy if you have a female in your life that has impacted you, make sure and let them know that you appreciate all that they do. We have so many great women, just not just in the past, but currently that are in our leadership and in our political system that are helping make great changes. So encourage them, support them, and celebrate them. So we will dive right in today. So what we've got on our agenda today, of course, I'm going to talk through what is CareerRise in case you're new to us. We've got a workforce welcome from Brett Lacey, and then we will dive in with Jasmine on the gender pay gap. We will make sure and leave time for Q&A, and then we'll wrap it up with some CareerRise updates. So, a little bit about CareerRise. If you're new to us, kind of what we do, we are a workforce intermediary, but the workforce development can be very complicated if you're new to it, and we really just want to help make that easier. So, our goal, our mission is to expand access to opportunities and resources that promote economic mobility, support skilled workers, champion good jobs, and strengthen communities, right? All things that we are all here to work together to achieve. And we really want to be the nation's leading funder collaborative that convenes job seekers, employers, and community resources to foster workforce opportunities that enable individuals to succeed, strengthen businesses, and drive economic mobility for resilient communities. And what does that mean, right? What does that mean? So um, we have two kind of programmatic legs of CareerRise. We have our West Side Works team that has a physical location for job seekers to come in to get that training. And then the other leg is our industry partnerships team, which is hosting this webinar today. So for the industry partnership team, we've tried to take all of that and make it easier for workforce development for employers and those who support them, right? It can be a complicated system, and we just want to make it easier to understand, to dive in, to help not only your own employees but job seekers to hire. And there's a variety of ways that we do that. So part of it is about education on like what the ecosystem is, and our webinar series kind of fits into that a little bit. We also like to create alignment so that we can all drive towards common goals, right? We don't have to work in silos. We want to make sure that we can kind of all come together and work together towards that common goal. One of the ways that we can also do that is help build capacity and help provide support through low risk programming. And what we mean by low risk programming is quite often, because we're a grant funded and a nonprofit that fundraises for things, quite often there might be no cost to an employer to get that capacity and support. We really just want your time and your passion to get the work done. As I mentioned, our webinar series is part of that kind of education piece. So, and our goal is to kind of provide both innovative and practical ways, both tools and resources to help empower employers and our partners that support them. And it kind of fits into these five buckets that you see on screen that we recognize that it hits every employer in some way, right? So hiring and sourcing candidates, right? You got to find good talent. Training and registered apprenticeships is really about making sure, like maybe you have specific skill set that you need, and how do you make sure that your job seekers, that your employment base has those skills. The next two, employment success support and quality careers and workplaces, those really fit together, speaking to making sure that your employees stay with you. And it could be two things. The employment success is really about making sure that we can help remove barriers that might keep an employee from getting to work, right? Whether that's childcare or transportation, right? Things like that. And then the quality careers is we want to make sure that you are also offering a great workplace with good jobs for longevity so that somebody wants to stay with your company, right? And then the last part is also inspiring the next generation to make sure we're filling that tunnel at the top for talent. So that career and awareness promotion to encourage our next generation to join these career paths for you. So that's a little bit about CareerRise, and we're excited to continue to bring more opportunities like today's webinar to help bring to light new topics. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brett Lacey, who is the Managing Director of Workforce Solutions for our Atlanta Regional Commission for our Workforce Welcome. Thank you, Brett, for joining us today.
Thank you, Cherie. Yeah, we got that mouthful of a title. Good morning, everybody. And again, those that are just jumping on, again, continue to use that chat feature. Tell us who you are, who you're with, and get a connection there. Use that throughout today's presentation to ask questions and sort of engage in discussion there. I see a few friends already filtering through there, and some future friends also dropping into the chat. So again, on behalf of the five workforce boards that make up WorkSource Metro Atlanta, welcome again to this month's CareerRise webinar. We have a great topic today. We were sort of chatting with Jasmine before she jumped on, and she's made a promise to me that the techniques and topics of today's discussion on the gender wage gap is going to be solved based on today's conversation by the time my three girls as Gen Alpha reach the workforce in about 20 years. She has promised me that we're going to use these techniques and solve this problem for them. So look forward again. Just use that chat feature to drop in some questions for any discussion at the end. I am recognizing that today kicks off one of the most exciting times of year for me, and I'm making an offer for everybody on right now. In my hands, I hold your stone cold locks for your bracket. You still have time to change them before the games tip off. So, the best question in the chat today, I will give all of the answers to March Madness by the end of the webinar. So, definitely use that feature. Let's have that discussion. Again, welcome. We thank you for being here this month. And we're going to hand it off back to Cherie to bring on Jasmine, introduce her for you all today.
Thank you, Brett. And go sports balls. Sorry, I'm not my jam, but that's okay. So excited for your excitement. All right. So thank you so much, Brett. Always great to have you. And Jasmine, we're very excited to hear more from you. So joining us today to talk about the pay gap, the gender pay gap, is Jasmine Payne-Patterson. She is the senior state policy strategist for the Economic Policy Institute. So we're very excited to hear from Jasmine. She has a very engaging presentation. So get ready for some polls and some chat. So, Jasmine, I will hand it over to you and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Great to meet everybody, to be in community with you. And all right, are we ready to solve the gender pay gap in what we have 35 minutes? All right, let's go. All right. Well, as everyone has already mentioned, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Jasmine Payne-Patterson, and I'm excited to join you here from the Economic Policy Institute. I'm going to start off with telling you a little bit about who EPI is, as we again go on this very large feat. EPI, or the Economic Policy Institute, was really founded to think about workers and how we can make life better for workers. So when we talk about the economy, it's everything through the lens of worker standards, labor relations, and really we were founded by the labor movement. So we're kind of like labor's think tank in that sense. A lot of union partners are still on our board, and we're instrumental in founding it. So we do a lot of research on various parts of the economy. As you can see, this is a screenshot of our website. So it's a little bit of sneak peek on some of the topics that we cover. So please feel free to peruse our website. I believe it's in the chat. I can't really see the chat right now as I'm looking, but yes, we have different resources and tools, and I'm going to go through some of these tools today. But one thing I didn't put in the tools that you might be interested in is you could even go to the wage calculator, as we're talking about wages today, and see how decades of wage suppression have affected your pay. So what your pay would have been if wages were not suppressed. Lots of fun there, or sad. Either way, we'll see after you kind of dig into that. If I can have the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit more about the team that I particularly sit on. Thank you. So I sit on what we call the Economic Analysis and Research Network, or the EARN team. So while EPI has a team of economists that focus on the national economy and look at things at the federal level, my team looks at the state level. So state level policies that are impacting us all. So as you see on the map on the right, what we do is work with the think tanks within each individual state to see how we can affect state policy and move it forward. In fact, how I even got connected today was through our state partner in Georgia, the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, which I'm sure many of you all are familiar with. They do such great work. So that's a little bit about EARN and our partners there. Next slide, please. All right, so if we're going to talk about wages, and before we even get to the gender wage gap, I thought it was really important to even talk about, like, what is the wage floor in Georgia? So we have a little poll for you all here today, and we want to know, what is the minimum wage in Georgia? So if you wouldn't mind launching that poll for me, we can kind of think through what you think it is. Do you think that it's $7.25, $5.15, $2, or that Georgia does not have a minimum wage? And I think I'll just give you 1 minute until it turns 11:16 for us to turn in our polls. Great to see more people joining us. Hello. All right, the poll has ended. All right, so looks like 72% of people said 725, 28% of people said 515, and the other two categories, no one responded to that. So I will share that our next slide is that the state of Georgia's minimum wage is actually 515. So there is some confusion there. So, and I'm glad that we get to talk about this because it's really important. The federal minimum wage is 725. However, states are allowed to choose their own minimum wages according to the Fair Labor Standards Act. And if we kind of unpack that a little bit, there's more stipulations about which types of organizations, if you make over $500,000, or if you do interstate commerce or something like that. Like there's different rules that would make people eligible to be covered or uncovered and everything like that. But the actual state of Georgia's minimum wage was 515. So funny story about this. I remember arguing with when I was in a master's program, my economics teacher. She's like, well, nobody's paid this. It's like, well, actually, yes, people are indeed paid and legally paid 515 per hour in the state of Georgia. So I don't know about you, but that makes me really mad because when I think about 515, just imagine what you can buy with 515 today. Can you even get a burger? Just thinking about like the transportation to get to work at 515 when thinking about MARTA costs, thinking about what it would make cost for gas, thinking about what it may cost to even get a bite to eat at lunch, thinking about what it may cost for childcare to make sure that your children are safe at school, and just thinking about what this wage is. So as we go to the next slide, we can, yes, can't even buy anything from Starbucks there with 515. So this is actually pretty not far from the standards across the South, unfortunately. So there are states that don't effectively have a minimum wage, and what happens then is most times like what the federal minimum wage of 725 would apply. But then you have also states. Georgia is one of the only two states that have a minimum wage that is 515. Wyoming is the other state in case you're interested. And this map is one that's on our website. Thank you again for putting it in the chat. So you can kind of look around if you're curious about what other states are doing and how that impacts them. So even through this minimum wage, these low minimum wages that are prevalent in the South, let's talk about the family budgets and how that impacts your minimum wage. Thank you. So I want us to think about our family budgets. So how much does a modest but adequate lifestyle cost in your county or your metropolitan area? We have this resource called the Family Budget Calculator, and I'm going to invite you to use the link in the chat to go to the Family Budget Calculator and put in exactly where you're at. So it could be that you are in Atlanta, so there's an option for Atlanta there. There's also an option for different localities to kind of see what that is. And I'm just going to look at how I'm doing on time. I think based on my time here, I'd love for you all to look at it, but I'll also maybe advance to the next slide to just kind of share an understanding with you all about the family budget for where at least I am right now. And I imagine most of your organizations are going to be around this, like this Atlanta, Sandy Springs, Roswell metropolitan statistical area. So what our economists did was put in data from USDA, DHS, like all different types of government sources to see, again, what is that modest but adequate style like cost, and how can we kind of look at these different costs to understand how much it would cost for a family budget. So in Atlanta, based on that government data, it would cost $119,593 to support a 2 adult and 2 child household. So I just want us to look at this a little bit and think about how this compares to your personal budget. And I know that when I've done this in the past, people are just like, yeah, actually, some of these things might need to tick up a little bit, or maybe like, yes, this is very similar to my budget, or I had to cut this thing out because I wasn't able to afford it. Maybe I didn't, I'm kind of struggling and trying to figure out other forms of childcare that are not appropriate or not really what I would want for my child, or just something that I'm really struggling with to try to figure out here. So this is the family budget for this area. So just giving a second to think about this budget and what those costs are. I want to zone in a little bit because I heard that you all recently spoke about childcare. So if we go to the next slide, I want to dig even deeper into childcare. So you'll notice that this number for childcare is different than the family budget from Atlanta, again, only because we're looking at Georgia now as opposed to a specific metropolitan area. But again, I won't get too far into the childcare part, but the Atlanta's childcare cost was 15,000, but across the state of Georgia, where of course the cost can be lower in many other areas, it's $11,863. So we did a little bit of cost comparison on this on our website to just compare the cost of childcare because it is so wild for working families who often rely on childcare so they can even get to work, to college, for example. So average the annual cost in Georgia for college, depending on the type of school, $7,000 in for this type of thing compared to childcare. Thing compared to housing, and again, that college cost will of course vary very widely if you're doing public versus a private school. If we're looking at housing, 16,000. If we're looking at 4-year-old care, 10,000. And then if you're looking at infant care, that gets us to that $11,863. So just looking at that, $989 per month, that is rent. That is actually, depending on where you live, maybe more expensive than rent, or maybe just a little bit on par, a little bit less, depending again on where we're located. So, understanding that these costs are especially significant for single parent households, which are disproportionately woman led, the more expensive that childcare is, the less women can participate in the labor force. And it's a different form of the pay gap because it actually kind of represents an opportunity gap for maybe the higher paying jobs that women could have received if they did have greater access to childcare or culturally appropriate care. Now let's go to the next slide to talk more about the essential question that I'm going to be asking you throughout this presentation. How and why? Why is this happening? How did we get here? So let's get into the gender pay gap quick facts on the next slide so I can get a little bit more specific about that part. So some quick facts for us to know. In 2025, so last year, women were paid 18.6% less on average than men. And this is, of course, controlling for race, ethnicity, education, marital status, etc., etc., etc. Another thing to know, Women's Equal Pay Day is March 26th. So if you're not familiar with Women's Equal Pay Day, or you hear that and it's just like, well, I don't really understand what it is, just imagine this. So in 2025, if to make up for the wages that men made in 2025, I would have to work as a woman, not only all the way through 2025, but to March 26th of this year to make up the average wages of men. So that is what marks that point. We're not even at that point in this year. We would still be working to catch up with the wages. Then the pay gap has also been narrowing since 2022, which we would say is good news, but new federal policies have disrupted that progress. So after 2025, or starting at 2025, the gap has actually increased. So it was 18% last, if we were talking about 2024, it was 18%. And then last year, it grew to 18.6%. So we're really going in the wrong direction there. So let's go to the next slide. And I want us to just take a couple of minutes to think and quickly reflect. First thing I want us to think about is, if the budget items we just shared, so as we were talking about transportation, childcare, housing, things that you all have talked about before in this group, and think about those items as it relates to your personal budget. What would it be like to be paid 18.6% less? How would that impact your ability to take care of yourself, your family, your neighbors, maybe even your fur babies, like all the various members of your families? How would that feel? And I'm just going to invite us, if you want to put it in the chat, you're welcome to. And if you just want to silently reflect on that, that's okay too. All right. So as we take in a second, thank you for sharing. Yeah, just thinking about how you could live independently or with a dependent. How does that impact your ability to just rest, which is really important to be able to find work later on, or to get a better job, or to even improve in your careers, or to hire, to have the state of mind to hire great employees, and just thinking about that prospect. Now, after we've kind of taken the time to reflect on that, I want us to take some more time to think about if we switch perspectives and think of how it would feel to be paid 18.6% more. Think about your current budget and how it would be to be paid 18.6% more. How would that impact your ability to care for yourself, your family, your neighbors, your community, your staff, your team? How would that impact wages overall of the people you would be able to hire? Thanks for sharing. So self-care items, being able to really think through how are you even supporting local businesses, supporting the other people in your community's ability to hire more and to care more and to participate more in our economy. So I hope as you are reflecting on that, we continue to think through, even if you didn't put in the chat, as you're thinking silently. That's what we're really looking at when we're thinking about the gender pay gap. And I want us to kind of, again, as we're solving it in the next couple minutes or so, what that means for us. So let's talk about what the gender wage gap is by different types of wage distributions, etc. So some more data for those of you all who are friends of data like me, or just nerds. Maybe that's the most honest way to say it. The gender wage gap is actually widest among top earners. So if you look at these different percentiles, it's the lowest around the 10th percentile, so the lower wage distributions is the kind of a little bit more wide when we look at the 50th percentile, but even when we look at the 90th percentile, that shows a much more significant change. So like we're looking at like around a little around $13 or so in that wage distribution. Now, when we talk about education in our next slide, that it gets even more interesting. So we can look at the wage gap across different education. And again, when we're talking about 18.6, we're already controlling for this, but it does get pretty fascinating. So among workers, women outnumber men in the college educated labor force and are more likely to obtain a graduate degree than men. However, even though women have this higher level of education in many instances, what's very clear from the data is that women, even with advanced degrees, so this bottom bar here, are paid less per hour on average than men with only college degrees. So women who have more education are being paid more. So women, as you can see here, men with a college degree are paid $50.01 per hour on average, compared to women with an advanced degree being paid $49.45. So it's another way we can see, like, even if you are working really hard, you're getting advanced degrees, you're paying for student loans of those advanced degrees, and many times you're still on average going to be paid more than being paid less than a man. If we go to our next slide, another interesting statistic, and like we were noting earlier, no surprise here. Yeah, the gender wage gap is bad, and also it gets worse by race. Black and Hispanic women experience the largest pay gaps. Black women are paid only 68.3% of white men's wages at the middle, a gap of $9.09 on an hourly basis. And when we look at what that translates to on an annual level, it's $18,900 lower annual earnings for a full-time worker than their white male counterparts. Hispanic women are paid only 65.3% of white men's wages, an hourly wage gap of $10.36. So for a full-time worker, that's going to be $21,500 a year less than their white male counterparts. Again, I hope that we're again going back to that how and why to think about why this happens and like again what that would mean for your wages if this were you or if it is you in this situation. So let's look at let's think again about how or why in our next slide to really think about like why does this exist. So I'm going to ask us to take some time for quick reflection in our next slide. And um, and as we get our next slide up, and we'll just say, I can actually just read off the quick reflection. I want you to take some time to think about why you think the gender pay gap is so wide in our society. And if you can, please just share your thoughts in the chat. I'm going to take a few moments here just to see how that is, what that means for you. Absolutely right. There are intergenerational impacts on families and communities, especially when you're trying to go to college to get that better career, to apply for that next job. More debt and less pay when you're talking about college degrees and many times. And again, that it kind of bridges with that intersectional and intergenerational comment there, because if I don't have if there's a wage gap in my generation, it's impacting the next generation and it's impacting my ability to pay for college. And then if even if I get a college degree and I might still, if I couldn't pay for college that well, if I didn't have the means to pay for college right out or something like that, that probably means more debt, and you're still not getting this pay, getting more pay for women. All right, I'm just gonna pause for a second here to see if there are any more reflections anybody wants to share. We invite you to really flood the chat to question and to interrogate how and why is this happening. Okay. I see that the chat is slowing down. So what I'm going to do is transition to the ask us to transition to the next slide, please. And I'm going to share a little bit about why. So here are some reasons that all build upon each other, unfortunately, in the worst way. So occupational segregation. If that is a term that you're not really familiar with and you're like, what are you talking about? Especially because it's cut off in this little arrow like going down here. That means that women are often relegated to parts of the labor force that are maybe are not the highest paying. So maybe it's often childcare, which has historically had low wages, clerical duties also often low wages, and then many of the other higher paying jobs or management jobs are often there's also often a lot of segregation between men and women in that area. Is also kind of building upon the reason for occupational segregation, the devaluation of women's work. So thinking that certain jobs that women are often in are devalued, and people are not understanding how important it is that we do care for our children, that we do teach our children, that we do all these different things, and not really paying those workers well. Then there's also societal norms. Again, building upon the devaluation of women's work, to think about what are those societal norms that cause this occupational segregation, that cause the devaluation of women's work, and also just these concepts that women may not need to make as much as men, or different stereotypes and things like that that we know are not true, but those have been norms in the past, and that we're trying to again in our time here unpack so we can solve the gender wage gap and by 12 o'clock. And then the discrimination in various forms, so whether that be because of the societal norms or the devaluation or the occupational segregation, these are some reasons why. If we go to the next slide, I also want to talk about the intersection of race in these. So we at EPI often talk about this concept of the Southern Economic Development Model. And this is what we often hear. I know we've all heard it. It's like, oh, like Georgia's so good for business, but like we have to think about, is it good for people though? How are we thinking about our people there and how the people who support the businesses and make our economy run, like how are we supporting them? And we often have heard people say, oh, like, go to the South because there's like many businesses come here for cheap labor and things like that. So that comprises what we call the Southern Economic Development Model, that will have low wages for and undercompensated labor. So that's going back to that 515 in Georgia and lack of minimum wage in several other southern states. There's limited business regulations, meaning that sometimes people can be treated in a certain way that is not becoming of how we want to treat our workers to make sure they stay, they're happy, they're living great lives. Regressive taxes, so lots of tax structures that are not helping to provide for public services, which again then supports our teachers and our public workforce. A weak safety net program, so our social safety net, whether it be SNAP or other things like Medicaid and Medicare, to help us make sure that we're good and healthy to be able to be productive at work and live productive lives as people. And then an aggressively anti-union policies that make it difficult to unionize in the workplace. Because of this Southern Economic Development Model, if we go to the next slide, it often causes economic mobility to be the lowest across the South. So this is a heat map, and just really quickly, what it is showing is the lack of economic mobility, and the redder it is displaying how the lowest amount of economic mobility. And as you see, Georgia, we are quite right on this map. And it kind of gets more yellow as we kind of go to the western side of the country and the northern side of the country. And a lot of that is due to the Southern Economic Development Model. So why am I telling you this? If we go to the next slide, it's because I want us to think about these intersections, and because it's not, as we think about these racial impacts from the Southern Economic Development Model that are fueled by a history of slavery, a history of low wages, a history of discrimination, that discrimination intersects with the way that we support or the lack of support for women as well. So let's think about in the chat which groups are heavily impacted by this model. So on the next slide, I'm just going to ask you again to fill the chat with your thoughts on this. Which groups are most heavily impacted by low wages? Look at this emphasis on cheap labor, all of those things. Well, who's most impacted by this? Absolutely right, Monty. Yes, the historical perspectives are play a big role in this. Thinking about like the women's movement, women's rights movement, thinking about how so much of that is about labor, and thinking about how our ability to, our rights to work in the workplace, our rights to vote, our rights to participate in our economy and our society in a much more meaningful way than what was suppressed before. Because we as women have always participated in society, but like our voice wasn't always heard in that way. It was because it was suppressed, similar to how wages are suppressed. Yeah, we are awful on economic mobility, and we have to start thinking about how, if we can support our workers and be great on economic mobility, how that can support our economy overall. Yep. And yes, women, people of color, minorities, all of you all are saying it. People who have not gotten higher degrees of education, all of that is absolutely right. And thinking about who is most impacted by this. So I want to focus on a couple of groups here in our next slide to just kind of zone in on two groups in particular that I think are important to note. So domestic workers. So domestic workers are disproportionately women, and especially Black and brown women. But the typical domestic worker in the South earns just $18,252 per year. Again, so it's like just what they earn in total in a year is comparable to the wages that are lost in the gender wage gap when we're looking at Black women and even in Hispanic women. When we look at domestic workers, they earn 61% less than the typical non domestic worker in the United States. And 1/3 of the country's domestic workers actually live in the South. So, thinking about how that changes and impacts wages and also women's wages in the wage gap. Also, 60% of domestic workers in the South are home care aides, people who take care of our grandmothers, or even our mothers, our grandfathers, the people that we love, our neighbors, our friends. We can have some more data for the house cleaners and childcare workers, but I just want to spend even more time on the domestic workers here. So, domestic workers are excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, and they effectively are excluded from federal anti-discrimination laws, including the Civil Rights Act, the American with Disabilities Act, and the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, because those different policies generally cover employees with multiple employees and cover employers with multiple employees, which effectively excludes many domestic workers who often are working in family households that maybe they are the only one person effectively where they're working, or one of very few workers, which is also, as I was pointing back to the Fair Labor Standards Act, also how a lot of companies are able to pay people 515 because of these different clauses of the multiple employers. I want to switch to the next slide now to talk about another group. And that it really is something that impacts us all because we're talking about paid leave. So I focus a lot here on families via paid leave, but really paid leave impacts us all. So paid family and medical leave and paid sick leave, as we know, are essential benefits. So paid family and medical leave is that long-term leave. Maybe you are leaving your workplace for weeks or months at a time to care for a new child, whether it's through birth or adoption. Maybe you just are sick. We all know how COVID impacted all of our lives. So you just need some time off. That's more closer to a couple of days or even like maybe 2 weeks or so to just take care for yourself or your family member. And all of that is really important to make sure that we can return to work. We're not making our colleagues sick, and we can come back as our best selves. But in 2021, less than 70% of Georgians had access to paid sick leave. And a survey found that 7 in 10 working women in the fast food industry had gone to work when they were sick. So think about all of the times that you are going to get some food from a fast food establishment, and they had to go to work sick. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for your family who you are maybe going to that establishment to feed? And what does that mean for that worker? In 2024, Georgia doubled the weeks of paid parental leave for state employees from 3 to 6, which is a great accomplishment, but it still shows that we have a long way to go because state employees comprise only 3.9% of the Georgia's workforce. So, like basically 4% of people had access to more paid parental leave, but there still leaves a large part of the workforce that doesn't. We say that a strong paid family and medical leave program would actually be closer to 12 weeks than 6 weeks, and it would cover everybody. And right now, Alabama is actually doing better than we are in this. And I know as a Georgian, I don't like to hear that. They have 8 weeks for K through 12 teachers, community college employees, legislative personnel, court officials, etc. And Virginia just passed a law. It has not been signed by the governor, but we hope that it soon will be. That will be the first state in the South to have a paid family medical leave program that is expansive. I wish that we could say that was us in Georgia, but I do hope that we are the next. This legislative session, there was an actuarial study that would basically help us to understand the cost of having a PFML, but it did not pass. So as I'm coming up on time, I'm going to just kind of go through these solutions rather quickly, and we can expand upon them in the Q&A section. So if we go to the next slide, I'm sure of you are like, okay, Jasmine, this is kind of depressing, and it's Women's History Month, so I want to figure out, again, by 12 o'clock, how do we solve this? What do we do? What do we as individuals do? What do we as employers do? What do we do as community members? In our next slide, I'll share just a little bit more about what that is. So the first one thing you can do is support women by supporting unions. Union membership and consequently contracts eliminate a root cause of the gender wage gap by creating pay transparency and a legally binding guarantee that there is going to be equal pay for equal work. We also say know that higher wages mean that union workers have a smaller gender wage gap than non-union workers. And then by improving union membership for women, it also improves other different essential benefits, like we were mentioning paid leave before, pensions, healthcare coverage, and overall wages and access to these benefits. Another way that I'll demonstrate in the next slide is through policies like the Crown Act. So the Crown Act stands for creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. This is just one way that we can create guardrails to make sure that women and black and brown women especially, are not discriminated against in the workplace, because that discrimination inhibits their ability to get jobs, whether it's discrimination during the hiring process, which we did find is substantial. Then there's also discrimination in advancements and in discrimination and overall your assessment as a worker. So we're strengthening workplace protections like the Crown Act, like passing the Crown Act and many other policies like this, would actually help address the pay gap, pay inequality overall, but particularly for black women. And if we can go to the next slide. Increasing the minimum wage is another way to shrink the wage gap. Women make up the majority of affected workers receiving less, and the minimum wage, because women make up the majority of people who are working less, 58% of affected workers by a minimum wage are women. And then the federal minimum wage has not increased from that 725 that we talked about in almost 16 years. So, and it has eroded in value so much that really lifting the wage gap really would help women. And in our next slide, the federal wage gap. A couple other solutions that would help is requiring federal reporting of pay by gender, race, and ethnicity, prohibiting employers from asking about pay history, requiring employers to post pay bands, and even as employers, posting those pay bands ourselves can help. And then demanding adequate staffing and funding for commissions like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is charged with enforcing that these non-discrimination laws are in place and are being protected. So as I go to the last slide, I just want to say in closing, help close the wage gap. Hopefully we did it in this time that we spent together. And if not, we're going to explore other opportunities to do so. Now happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jasmine. That was a lot. I really do appreciate it's the numbers that are important, right? We have to kind of understand everything that goes into creating this wage gap before we can solve the world's problems, right? And we will get there. Our goal, Brett, right? By the time your girls are working age. But really thankful for all of the great information that you've provided. Obviously, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat for Jasmine. I know we dropped a lot of links, but don't forget you can save your chat. So don't worry about trying to grab those now. You can save the chat by clicking the three dot menu. But I would love to kind of start as we wait for some individuals to kind of go through there. And you touched on it in one of the chats, is like, how do we make sure that we're staying continually in the loop on like how we can affect it, right? You mentioned that something in the legislation at Georgia didn't pass this year. What are some ways that we at a local level can help make sure that we're staying in the loop on these changes or possible changes in the future?
For asking that question. So I think the first thing is showing up today, showing up to things like this to make sure that you're staying informed, because as if you don't know that things are a problem, you can't impact that change. So please stay in the loop. Yes, there are so many links. I know I just shared a lot there, but I just really, again, if for my fellow nerds, wanted to make sure that you all have the data here, and you can go back and verify it yourselves and through the data and through the readings. And we'll actually have another publication coming out soon that I'll make sure I share on the gender wage gap and all the updated data. There will be more tables, different things from one of our economists who is gracious enough to let me get a preview of some of her tables from that report that will be released next week. But so continuing to read, also thinking about these things as a heart issue, like continue to ask how and why is this happening, and if there's, as we ask how and why, make it personal. Think about how we are, if there's any way that we're carrying this forward. So maybe you're doing it unintentionally, and maybe it's like, oh, well, today I realized I can easily put the pay band on the job application. That'll make it a more attractive application for one, because people aren't wondering. Another thing is like it helps close the gender wage gap because you're creating pay transparency, and you're also creating a norm, as we talked about societal norms before, that's making it okay and encouraged for other employers to do that too. And also, can again, like we're talking about for Brett's daughters, to make sure that when they're applying for jobs, that they have this opportunity. As I think about my daughter, I want to make sure that she has these opportunities too. And then at the legislative level, there's so many opportunities to call your state legislator and just to let them know what you care about, because they're in session right now and it's an election year. So you are their employer. And as thinking as their employer, as you all are employers, like you have an agenda, you have a schedule, it's strategic. You need them to know that. So letting them know, hey, it's really important that we have paid leave. It's really important that we have childcare. So please continue to push, or please do push for policies that are important to you. And that gives us more weight when we're talking, because they really care about the opinion, especially of small businesses and small business owners, to say, oh yeah, like this is what I care about. And also things like paid leave make it easier to run a paid small business, because then you're not competing with these large companies for the benefits that you probably want to give to your employees. You may, oh, it's just really expensive. So making it a part of a whole Georgia statewide system makes it less expensive and easier for your employees to access, and more competitive for you as an employer.
Excellent. Yeah, because that bottom line's important. We've got a question from Robert. Robert, you can unmute yourself now and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Robert Joseph, Team Mindshift. And my question is centered around when somebody is going to get a job, how do you recommend women being able to understand what the range of pay is for that job so that they can ask for equal wages? Is there any technique or any ideas of how to do that?
Yeah. I mean, on the employee side, you can ask for what like at the outset what the pay band is, so that you can have a better understanding of that. And also negotiating your wages. I know that was something that I was afraid to do. And it is really scary. So like making more opportunities to teach people, and women especially, how to negotiate, because men are more likely to negotiate those wages up. And sometimes an employer may be offering you the lower end of the pay band. So if you know it, you can at least say, okay, well, I know what to ask for, what is even available to me. And then also, I'm going to negotiate higher. But I also, even though that is something that women can do, I think that oftentimes, like if we want to create something for society to be able to navigate this better, it shouldn't have to be on women. Like as an employer, we can say like, yeah, we need to have more pay transparency so they don't have to ask that question. And also, if you have pay transparency, it's easier to know, oh, there is a wage gap, because the only other way that you're finding that out is maybe like you befriend somebody, and like at the water cooler, you're having a conversation about what this different, how much you're paid versus how much somebody else is paid, because it's not something that's typically that open. But a wage gap is a way to make it be more open and more visible.
Thank you. That helps.
Thank you,
How
Jasmine.
was
And
a
I
wage
also
band?
dropped in the chat. I know this was a resource that we encouraged our students when I worked at KSU to use, salary.com. You can put in your location, your level of education, the title. Like you can get really in the weeds of like how much experience you have, and it'll tell you like where on the scale you should be paid. So that might give you at least some directional information to know your worth for that specific job. So I know we're running low on time, but Jasmine, I just truly want to thank you so much for taking us through this, giving us so much information, so much food for thought. so that we can really kind of take this and keep moving forward together to help close that gap as best we can. So thank you so much for joining us today.
So much for having me. And if anybody is interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'll put my email address in the chat. But thank you all.
Thanks, Jasmine. So we'll just a couple of quick updates from CareerRise. This year's the year of apprenticeship. I'm sure it's not the first time that anyone has heard us talk about apprenticeships this year. So if you are an employer and you're interested in like how do you create a registered apprenticeship, please reach out to us. Corinne Cadet from our team is ready to kind of explore what the options are, figure out how best to partner and build that with you and taking you through that registration process. So we are here to support you for creating those apprenticeships, registered or not. If you want to help remove some barriers for your employees or the job seekers that you're working with, if you haven't heard about it before, Georgia Commute Options is a great option. At its core value, it's really to promote a cleaner commute. But as we know, transportation is such a problem in Atlanta. Having more options and thinking differently about your commute really can help remove some barriers. They are doing they always have like different programs going on, but it's employers can really kind of get locked in and receive some benefits, right? Think about some of the tax benefits if you help remove transportation barriers for your employees, recognition programs. So you can kind of, if you're an employer, you can get connected from Georgia Commute Options to help your team. And then of course those job seekers that are using those employees that are using Georgia Commute Options, if you're choosing a cleaner commute, you're likely saving on gas and car expenses. There are ways to earn rewards. And then, of course, you're saving time as well and helping our planet stay greener. So if you are interested to learn more about Georgia Commute Options, we've got a QR code on the screen, but you can also connect with Brooke Stahl on my team, and her email is in the chat. And this year, obviously, we were awarded the Wanto grant or late last year. And, we've been talking about women a lot today. And a great way to help women get into some of those higher paying jobs is to help them through an apprenticeship. So if you're an employer that is interested in having more women join your company, if you are a non-traditional occupation for women, we would love to meet with you and talk through how we might support you using the Wanto grant to create those pathways for more women to enter non-traditional roles. So you can reach out to me, and my email is in the chat. And of course, staying connected with us. Obviously, if you're on our webinar, continue to join our webinars. We have a different topic each month, but there's lots of ways to stay connected with us. We do have a digest, that QR code right in the middle to sign up for our digest that we send out each month to kind of keep you in the loop, things that we're hearing. And of course, we would love for you to follow us on LinkedIn. We are also on Instagram now as well. So you can stay connected with us there so that as we share resources, you can hear it there first in our digest and on LinkedIn. For our webinar series, we have a couple of great topics coming up as we finalize more topics for the rest of the year. So continue to join us. The QR code on the screen is to register. Obviously, if you're here today, you've probably registered for it, but we encourage you to share it out with the rest of your connections in your community, anyone that you think would benefit from hearing some of our topics. So we hope to see you in future months as well. And quick reminder, I know I said it earlier, but we had so many great links in the chat today. So make sure and save your chat. If in the chat box, you're going to click the three dots menu, and there should be an option that says to save the chat. And of course, we want to make sure that we're continuing to bring you great topics in our webinar. So as you are exiting the webinar today, it will pop up a quick survey. We'd love to hear from you so that we can continue to bring you great presenters, great topics, and hear your thoughts. So we look forward to seeing you next month in April. April is Registered Apprenticeship Month, so we're very excited. But in the meantime, if you have any questions for us, of course, reach out to us at industry.partnerships@careerriseatlanta.org, or you can give us a call. But we are here and we are excited to continue to connect with you, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you so much for joining us.